The courtroom was designed to intimidate. Tall ceilings, cold marble floors, and a judge's bench that loomed over everyone like a throne. But Cassandra Miller didn't care about any of that. She stood at the defense table, gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles turned white. This was her last chance. Across from her, Judge Gerald Lancaster watched her with thinly veiled amusement. He had seen 100 desperate single mothers before, begging for mercy in his courtroom. And he never gave it. The prosecutor, Daniel Holt, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the facts are simple. Ms. Miller is 6 months behind on rent, and the landlord has every legal right to evict her." Cassandra's heart pounded, not because she was afraid, but because she knew the truth. And today, so would everyone else. Judge Lancaster folded his hands. "Ms. Miller, do you have any evidence that contradicts the state's case against you?" Cassandra took a slow breath. Then she placed a thick envelope on the table. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice steady. "I do." The judge's smirk faded, because he recognized that envelope, and he knew exactly what was inside it. A hush fell over the courtroom. Judge Gerald Lancaster didn't move. His fingers twitched slightly as he stared at the envelope Cassandra Miller had placed on the table, because he knew what it was, and he never expected to see it in public. Prosecutor Daniel Holt frowned. "Ms. Miller, what exactly is in that envelope?" Cassandra's grip on the table tightened, but her voice remained steady. "This," she said, sliding the envelope toward the judge, "is proof that Judge Lancaster has been accepting illegal payments from my landlord to push through wrongful evictions." A collective gasp filled the courtroom. Judge Lancaster's smirk was gone. His face darkened. "You're making a serious accusation, Ms. Miller." Cassandra met his stare without fear. "I know," she said. "That's why I brought the receipts." The judge stiffened. Prosecutor Holt looked caught off guard. "Your Honor, if these allegations are true—" "They're not," Lancaster snapped. But his voice lacked conviction. Cassandra pushed forward. "Your Honor, inside that envelope are bank statements, wire transfers, and emails showing that my landlord, Robert Langley, has been bribing you to rule against tenants who fight back against their evictions." Her voice rose. "And I am one of those tenants." The courtroom exploded. Murmurs turned into outraged whispers. Reporters in the gallery frantically took notes. Judge Lancaster's hand shook slightly as he picked up the envelope. He glanced at the bailiff, then at the court stenographer. He was cornered, completely trapped. Cassandra leaned forward. "Open it," she said. Judge Lancaster hesitated, because once he did, everyone would know the truth. And his career, his entire world, would be over. The courtroom felt suffocatingly tense. Judge Gerald Lancaster held the envelope in his hands as if it were a loaded gun, because he knew the moment he opened it, everything would change. Cassandra Miller stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. She had spent months gathering this evidence, and now she had him cornered. The gallery leaned forward in anticipation. Even Prosecutor Daniel Holt, who had been so sure of his case, looked uneasy. Judge Lancaster cleared his throat, forcing his usual calm demeanor. "Ms. Miller," he said, his voice dangerously smooth, "I find it interesting that you suddenly have financial documents that, if real, would incriminate a sitting judge." Cassandra didn't blink. "What's interesting is that you seem more worried about me having the evidence than about what's actually inside." A few people in the gallery gasped. Lancaster's jaw tightened. "Objection," he snapped, looking toward Holt. "This is clearly an attempt to distract from the actual eviction case." But Holt, still staring at the envelope, didn't say a word. Cassandra's lips curled into a smirk. "Why don't you just open it, Your Honor?" she asked. "Unless you already know what it says?" The whispers in the gallery grew louder. Judge Lancaster's hand shook slightly. Before he could respond, Judge Reeves, the senior judge overseeing misconduct cases, stood from the back of the room. "This court will take an immediate recess," Reeves announced. He stepped toward Lancaster, his expression like steel. Judge Lancaster, hand over that envelope to the court clerk. Right now. Lancaster's face paled. He didn't move. Because this was it. If he refused, he looked guilty. If he handed it over, he was guilty. And for the first time in his career, he had no way out. Judge Gerald Lancaster sat frozen, the envelope in his grip feeling heavier than it should. The courtroom was no longer his kingdom. The whispers had turned to murmurs. The murmurs had turned to suspicion. And suspicion, that was deadly. Senior Judge Jonathan Reeves stood at the front of the courtroom, his gaze sharp as a blade. Judge Lancaster, I won't ask again. Hand over the envelope. The bailiff stepped forward. The pressure was crushing. Judge Lancaster's hand twitched. Then, slowly, reluctantly, he extended the envelope toward the court clerk. As soon as it left his fingers, his entire world collapsed. The clerk stepped to the bench and handed the envelope to Judge Reeves, who opened it without hesitation. For a moment, the courtroom was silent. Then, Reeves let out a low exhale. He turned to the gallery. What I am holding, he said, are bank records, wire transfers, and private communications between Judge Lancaster and a well-known property management firm, one that has been at the center of hundreds of eviction cases in this court. Gasps erupted. Cassandra Miller didn't move. She had known the truth for months, but now everyone else did too. Judge Reeves continued, his voice steady but sharp. These documents show that Judge Lancaster has received large, unexplained deposits, some within days of ruling against tenants in eviction cases. He turned to Lancaster. Tell me, Judge, is this all just a coincidence? Lancaster's throat bobbed. He looked around the courtroom, searching for an escape, for someone to save him. But there was no one, because now he was the one on trial. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. Judge Gerald Lancaster's face lost all color as Judge Jonathan Reeves set the damning documents down. The evidence was clear. The money transfers, the private communications, the unethical rulings. There was no escape. Cassandra Miller, the woman he had tried to crush, stood tall and unwavering. For months, she had been silenced, ignored, dismissed. Not anymore. Judge Reeves turned to Prosecutor Daniel Holt, who had spent the entire trial assuming Cassandra was just another desperate single mother grasping at straws. Now, she was the most powerful person in the room. Mr. Holt, Reeves said, do you still wish to proceed with the state's case against Ms. Miller? Holt's mouth opened, then closed, because he knew. If he pushed forward now, he'd be aligning himself with a corrupt judge who had just been exposed. And he wasn't willing to go down with Lancaster. Holt cleared his throat. Your Honor, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Ms. Miller. A shockwave went through the room. Cassandra's knees almost buckled as she processed the words. It was over. She had won. Judge Reeves nodded. Then, his gaze returned to Lancaster. As for you, he said, his voice turning ice cold, you are now under immediate review for judicial misconduct. The bailiff stepped forward. Judge Gerald Lancaster, you are hereby relieved of duty pending further investigation. Gasps. Shock. Lancaster, the man who had ruled from the bench as if he was untouchable, now looked smaller than ever. Take him to my chambers, Judge Reeves ordered. Now. As Lancaster was escorted away, Cassandra finally allowed herself to breathe. Her life had been hanging by a thread. But today she didn't just save herself. She took down a corrupt system. The courtroom was no longer a place of fear for Cassandra Miller. For months, she had dreaded stepping into this room, knowing she was fighting against a system rigged against people like her. But today, she had turned the tables. As Judge Gerald Lancaster was escorted out of the courtroom in disgrace, Cassandra stood tall. Her eviction case? Dismissed? Her record? Wiped clean. The corrupt judge who had tried to destroy her? Stripped of his power. Judge Jonathan Reeves adjusted his glasses and turned toward Prosecutor Daniel Holt. This court, Reeves said. "We'll be launching a formal review of all eviction cases ruled on by Judge Lancaster over the last 5 years." The gallery murmured in shock. Prosecutor Holt nodded grimly. Because if Lancaster had been taking bribes from landlords for that long, how many other families had been wrongfully evicted? How many had been silenced before they could fight back? Cassandra felt a lump form in her throat. She had nearly been one of them. As the final paperwork was signed, her lawyer turned to her. "You did it, Cassandra." She let out a breath. It wasn't just about her. It was about every single person who had been forced out of their homes under Lancaster's rulings. Now, the system was finally forced to look at itself, and for once it blinked first. As she left the courtroom, reporters swarmed her. "Ms. Miller, how do you feel about bringing down a corrupt judge?" She smiled. "I wasn't trying to bring him down," she said. "I was just trying to stand up for myself." She glanced back at the courthouse one last time. This time she wasn't afraid of it, because now she had proven that even the smallest voice could take on the system and win.